What's the forgivability of this loan if I utilize it for certain things? So immediately your mind is thinking, what can I do, not what I cannot do. That's not my focus. And so adaptability in a world that's constantly changing, what gives you a sense of stability is the fact that you have choice, the freedom of will, that I do have a choice. I don't have to just go with what my reaction should be or is being broadcast as it ought to be, because that's what everybody else is doing. I'm very much about being a black sheep, an ugly duckling, the one that doesn't belong. That's how you go through and say, well, why do I have to do that? Do I have to? I don't have to. I didn't lay off any of my employees when this happened. But in that very sense, people said, well, why would you not do that? You could be saving cash. And I said, yeah, but I feel like saving a few $1,000s isn't worth the injury to the relationship that may cause with this employee when this is over. And I'm like, hey, can you come back? And they're like, so the next time stuff hits the fan, you're going to let me go again. So to me, there's a huge breach of trust versus now I've actually used this situation to build more loyalty from the people that work with me.
There's so much that we can unpack on this. Before we do, there's other people here with us in this Zoom call. And so I don't want to hog all the time. And so if anyone has any questions, just go ahead and type in the chat and we'll be able to feed those through. Anyone joining us on Facebook as well, go ahead and feed in some questions, and we'd love to get some interaction happening here. So how then do we decide what is unchangeable and what is open to change, what is open to adaptation? Because as you said, that there are certain principles that undergird your business, like you value loyalty, you value trust. Yes. And so you're not willing to adapt on those things. You're not willing to give up those principles, no matter what the world is doing around you. But at the same time, that requires a certain adaptation. And so how do you decide between the two? What are the things that I am open to change and what aren't I willing to change?
So it's a great question. I think one of the ways that we make those decisions is we have to decide what is non-negotiable. And, when we look at adaptability and our desire for stability, we have to decide on, in my values and my ultimate sense of purpose, and the values that are going to guide me to accomplishing that, I'm not willing to adapt those based on the situation. Because of COVID, doesn't give me license to become a thief. And because I am really stressed out financially, or I don't know what's going to happen with my job, that doesn't give me the right to all of a sudden become a complainer or to overeat or whatever other reactions. Like, wait, those are not my values. So why am I adapting that? In this situation? I'm operating outside of my values. They don't have to change because the environment changes. And in fact, that is how agents of change exist in the world. They're the thing that doesn't change when everything else is changing. They influence everything else to change while they do not. My father used to tell me when I was about 15 years old, and I remember sitting on this cut down tree stump in our front yard. And as I'm talking to my dad about what I was doing in life and all these different things that's going on, and my dad looks at me and he just goes into this Navy story of how he was in the woods somewhere. And he said, I looked around and I realized there was no one here that I was willing to follow. And that's when I realized I'm the leader. And then he looked at me and said, if you're in a situation in which everyone around you and everything around you, you're not willing to follow them, that means you're the leader. And in this sense, that was a narrative way of basically saying, when all these things are changing and you're like, I'm not going to go down that path, then you have to trailblaze. You have to create the path. And yes, it takes more work. It requires more effort. But the reality is I'm not going to compromise my values. I'm not going to compromise my aim and my goal just because everything is changing. But there are things that should be on the table, and that is your methodology. That is your path. Those are the traditions, if you will, that aren't necessarily God-given, in stone, forever settled in heaven. These things can never change. These are things that you can say, well, who says that we have to have church in a physical building? We could have church online. And everybody's learning that across the world. And so when I look at the ability to be adaptable, but also recognize what I should not change and what I can change, it helps me recognize from my business, closing down is not an option. Pursuing my goal is not an option. Providing and solving the problem in my market is not an option. I'm not going to stop doing that. I'm just going to do it in a more creative way. And I could give you a host of examples of this. People who didn't do it and people who did do it, and you see the results that come from that.
So change is necessary, but as you shared before, for those that may have missed it, God doesn't change. And so is there a tension there? How do we relate to God as a changing being, a being that is open to change, and also just that the pressure that there is to change around us when we're relating to a God that doesn't change?
Well, I think the immutability of God and the fact that he cannot change is the basis of trust. I love the attributes of God, and that's one of my favorite ones. Because when you say that God cannot change, I change not, is what he says in Malachi. When God makes that statement, the moment he says that is the moment that God is saying to you and me, what I am at any moment, I have been at every moment of time.
Wow.
So that means however God felt about you at the cross, he's felt about you every moment of your life. The very thing he did to Adam when Adam sinned, he was looking for Adam. God does not change. So how does God react when I fail? When I commit a moral fault? He's looking for you. That's what he's doing because God does not change. And so relating to him is really, the reaction is trust. It's worship, because you realize that is my stability. That's the Psalm 46 of, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in time of trouble. Well, even if the earth be removed, even if the mountains be thrown into the sea, I will not fear. Why? Because God is still the same. And so that is the very basis of how we relate to God. And that's how we're able to be beings that are constantly dealing with change and facing change, and yet being in a relation with a being that nothing changes him, and yet he is influencing and changing things all the time as a result.
Yeah, wow. We've got some questions coming in, which are quite exciting along these lines. You mentioned before this idea of trailblazing. How do you manage that with a desire to not move ahead of where a team is, and how do you take people on a journey when you're really paving the way and the course is unknown?
This is kind of the heart of what we call, some people would call transformational leadership. Other people would call it change management. Some people would just call it inspirational leadership. There's three things you must do to get a team to come along with you when you're going into a new vision or you're making a pivot or an adaptation. The first thing is you have to prove and convince them that change is necessary. You have to convince them of that. If I want the people in security at the nuclear power plant to wear gloves, I have to convince them that change is necessary by research and saying, these are all the individuals who work in this area and have been severely wounded and experienced radioactive poisoning because they didn't wear gloves. Do you want to suffer radioactive poisoning? You just convinced me that change is necessary, but we don't have any gloves in my business. Where do we get such gloves? How do you know those gloves are going to work? So then the second thing you have to convince me of is change is possible. So show me someone who's done it. Give me an example. Paint a picture for me. Help me to visualize it. Okay, change. I could see that. And once people see it's necessary and it's possible, then your third responsibility is to convince them that they're the ones to actually carry it out. You have the tools, you have the ability, you have the equipment to make this change come to pass. And that is the essence of garnering dedication in a spirit, in a context of leadership. If I convince people that change is necessary, that change is possible, and that they are the ones to make the change, they will come along with you for the journey.
What about in situations where you share with the team, you're communicating openly that certain factors are requiring us to change, and you kind of share a bit of a vision. I've seen that kind of situation creates a bit of a blood in the water kind of scenario, and then those sharks that are looking to take you down as leader or usurp leadership, they
Mhm.
kind of rise to the forefront, and then yeah, it's almost communicated as a sense of weakness, that you're not able to carry out the trajectory that you were on in the course that you were following.
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I feel like the the reality of that is this brings in another aspect of leadership, which is the power of framing. There are leaders that face reality, and there are leaders that create their own reality.
Mm,
When you communicate words as a leader, you are creating a reality. And the first aspect of framing, which a frame is a structured way of thinking.
mm,
And people who are framing are communicating that structured way of thinking. So this is literally how politicians and people deal with, PR problems like, oh, our business was hacked and all that data. So people are immediately thinking my data's been accessed. So what do they come on TV and do? Your data has been very secure. We've been researching this. We want you to know your data is fully protected. You are not under threat of anything. What is he doing? He's reframing the situation.
mm.
He is literally creating a reality in your mind about what the situation is and isn't by the words that he's using. And people would say, now there's definitely an ethics to that, right? We don't just frame things the way we want them to be, regardless of the facts. That would be unethical as a leader. But there are different ways of looking at it. There is a silver lining. There is the glass is half empty or half full, is a perfect example of framing. I could say when I'm walking to my mother's house, we're halfway there. People say, man, this is really far. We should go back because look how much farther it is. Or you could say, well, we're halfway there. We already walked the distance. So we know we can walk this same distance because we're halfway there. The midpoint means whatever we have to go, we've already proven we can go that distance.
Hmm.
That's framing. And so as a leader, when you're dealing with people who are trying to usurp authority and these type of things, it's very critical that when you introduce your vision and you're showing that change is necessary and possible, at that point in time, you have to make sure that you're framing it properly. You're creating context for what's happening. This is not me ever saying that, when these budget cuts, for example, doesn't mean that that raise is off the table. This doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to take your son to that theme park for his birthday. That's not what this means. See, you just provided context. Let me give one quick example on this. Is when there was a woman who she basically gives lectures in storytelling. And she went to the Pentagon, which is the military center here in America. And they were talking about cutting budget cuts for these top, level of the military. It's like, look, we got to cut your pay. And of course, nobody wants their pay to get cut. And so she comes in to facilitate this very, very sensitive discussion with people with all kind of medals on their chest, served in this war and that war, and their chest is all out. And she begins to quote the poem called The Unknown Soldier. And that poem is talking about how this soldier, all these soldiers who have died in war, and nobody knows their names, but we know that they died because their family can't find them. And as she begins to read this poem about the unknown soldier, it says, was my sacrifice in vain? Are you taking care of my friends back home? Who continued on. As she begins to quote this poem, the entire spirit in the room, and they realize we're cutting our budget so that we can make sure we take care of the unknown soldiers.
Hmm.
You just framed it. And now a budget cut doesn't hurt you as much because people are now saying, I'm cutting my budget so I can take care of the small private and his family. Hmm. Now I'm proud to take a budget cut. When before this meeting and before you framed it, I was like, absolutely not. I'm not, you're not expecting me to do less work. Why are you cutting my pay? Hmm. And that is the power of framing when people don't seem to be so willing to come along.
Hmm. That's so powerful because obviously the society in which we live at the moment is, there is so much change taking place all the time. And I see a lot of people merely reacting to that out of fear or just trying to grasp, just trying to figure out how they can stay afloat, right? So
Yes.
how is it that we can remain calm in the midst of what is happening around us, so that we're not just kind of blown over by every wind, every time the wind changes?
Yes.
Because I think in the society at the moment, within the people that I'm surrounded by, this is a very real question, right?
Well, I think that there are several things that people can do. One of the first things that helps people in terms of adaptability is to develop your resilience, because another AQ is adversity quotient, your ability to deal with adversity and problems. And that adversity quotient is about the science of resilience. How do you bounce back? And the first thing about resilience is to own the reality of the situation. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't try to make it look flowery. Like, you have to own the reality of it. Then from there, you have to find meaning through that situation. When you help people find meaning in adversity, and they're like, I'm just trying to find stability, I'm trying to find my way through it, giving them something to find meaning, like Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he talks about being in a concentration camp in Germany and how he was trying to sell, things of bread so he can get an extra cigarette. He was like, what am I doing? I'm a psychologist. And he realized that I'm going to study everything happening in this place so that one day I'm going to give a lecture about why certain people survived and why certain people didn't. And what he said was those who found meaning through their experience were more resilient in coming out of that situation. And that's what you have to provide for people. Help them show that meaning is, this situation is an indication of a greater truth, of a greater reality. You have to give them sort of what we call a meta narrative, some commentary on life that says, wait, this is a part of a bigger story. There's a bigger thing happening there. And that helps people remain calm in the midst of a lot of change very rapidly that they're finding it hard to kind of digest.
So therefore, we have the opportunity then to frame for our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, those that we're interacting with, our employees. We have the opportunity to frame their experience, even though there's so much happening, by kind of zooming out on that greater narrative and pointing them forward to a greater vision. No, very, very practical. So question that's come in for us is, how do I know my AQ? How do I measure it? How do I know if it's high? Or is this something that we can take a test like an IQ? Or
I'm pretty sure there's probably a couple tests or metrics out there. I don't know if they necessarily have them for businesses, but adversity quotient is something you can test. Resilience would be, taking a resilience test would give you a good sense about your adaptability, and also a stress test, because stress is adaptability. Anything that requires you to adapt is clinically considered stress. So, oh wait, I came home and my wife is like, dinner's not ready. I have to adapt to that because I'm hungry. So do I get angry? Do I get frustrated? Do I huff and puff? Do I still give her a hug and kiss anyway? Like, how do I react to having to adapt to that? And so any of those tests or metrics would help you, but I'm pretty sure there's probably a test out there. But one of the easiest ways to kind of test yourself, and I'm an entrepreneur, so we like to run experiments, test things out and see if they work. What I would do for myself is say, okay, I'm going to, ask some people around me to change something every single day. And when they change it, right, don't tell me what it is, don't tell me why, like really try to convince me that you really wanted to change this thing, whatever it is. And let's see how I react to that. What's my gut feeling? And you got to surprise me. It can't be obvious. Like, I moved your charger for your phone. Like, that's small, right? It's got to be big. Like my wife saying, you know what, from now on, like, we're going to have dinner at 4:00. And if you're not here, we're eating without you. And she's got to sell me on that. And convincing me, my reaction in that conversation is going to show my adaptability quotient. How can I react and how can I do that?
Very good, very good. We've got a question come in. You might want to answer this one quickly. Any biblical examples of framing? Just from our conversation.
Oh yeah, I mean, the obvious one is the Israelites at the border of the Promised Land with the 13 spies, right? So the 12 spies come back and Joshua and Caleb are talking to people. So the other 10 spies are like, they're giants. They're going to kill us, right? They're going to take us out, right? And then Joshua and Caleb stand up and they're like, they're bread for us. Like God is going to give them into our hands. The promised land is ours. And so they're trying to reframe this. Yeah, they are giants. That's true. But that only shows the greatness of the victory God's going to give to us. And so in this sense, that's a perfect example of framing, right? Joshua and Caleb are like, no, that's not the structured way of thinking you should be approaching. This is only what you can see. You have to include the spiritual reality of who our God is. This is the same God who drowned Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. This is the same God that opened the sea, that sent 10 plagues, that brought manna from heaven, water from a rock, and we think we can't conquer giants? So that's a perfect example of framing. Another easy example would be Jesus talking about the law in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He's saying that, oh, except your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. People are like, what? Like, they're the most strict people I know. And Jesus says, well, you're talking about adultery, but are you lusting in your heart? So he's reframing the law to say it's not just about the letter, it's about the spirit of the law. And in these situations, he wins people over to him because they start seeing, oh yeah, that's true. Just because he's doing this outwardly doesn't mean that he's not sinning in his heart. And that reframe creates on one level more conviction, but it also shows the focus of God, which is about changing the inside, not just the behavior. So those are two clear examples of framing in the Bible.
Oh, very, very good insight there. So questions come in for us. So in a variety of settings, this is applicable, but church seems to really kind of highlight the need for this more so than not. We have individuals that are adverse to change. They aren't open and willing to change. Their mindset is very much fixed and they are very comfortable. There's a sense of stability there. There's a fear of loss that comes with change. How do you manage that process, and how do you manage these individuals and even yourself and the greater congregation within this scenario?
And there's a lot of questions in that and a lot of dynamics to see. The one thing that I always believe is very effective is, number one, the Bible. One of the principles we see in scripture as well as in life is that which at first is difficult, when done repeatedly, becomes easy, right? Sometimes you have to have the conversation more than once. Sometimes we're impatient. We're like, oh, I want to be able to talk to them, and then they accept the change, and when we change. No, you're going to have multiple conversations. You should be prepared that this isn't going to take 1, 2, or 3 conversations. This is going to take many conversations. And you have to be prepared for that. Jesus says you count the cost before you start. Seth Godin calls it the dip, right? There's going to be a period of time where there's no progress. It's going to look like nothing's going to happen. But the people who are successful are the ones who prepared for that dip, where there was no progress, where it seemed like things got worse actually, then they got better. And so coming in with that mindset that this isn't just going to take one conversation. I'm not going to wave my magic wand of communication and poof, alakazam, now everybody's willing to change. The second thing is you have to use stories. Storytelling is something that is underused in communication, and its ability to help create empathy, help people focus, help people understand very complex truths and ideas in a very practical, tangible way. And they allow people to practice a situation before they're actually in it. And so to me, storytelling, which in a Christian context would be testimonies. Oh, there's this church that started doing this, and this is what they're finding. The last thing is, when you're dealing with people who are resistant to change, so many times we want to convince everybody because we want to start large. But when we see Jesus, he lived in a time where many Jews were resistant to change. He ended up being crucified. They weren't all in favor of what Jesus was trying to do. So what did the Lord do? His example showed us that Jesus said, I'm going to take those who I can work with and start small. He had 12. Then next thing we know, in Luke chapter 9 and 10, he has 70. And the next thing we know, at Pentecost, there's 120 after the crucifixion. So it's very powerful to think about the fact that Jesus starts small. So you work with those who are willing to change. And I always say this, especially in the church, nobody likes to join something when it starts. They like to join it when it's already successful. So if you start with a group of people and you become successful, they will join. And next thing you know, you will get momentum. But the end of the day, someone's got to be the awkward dance. And that's, Seth Godin talks about the tribe concept. And he uses the story of this man who looks like a hippie, and he's got these crazily large clothing, tie-dye, multicolored, and he's sitting on a hill with a group of people. And all of a sudden he stands up and he just starts dancing, some random type dancing. And the first time, everybody's just looking at this guy like, what is wrong with this guy? And all of a sudden, a second person stands up and starts dancing with him. And he starts breaking down how to build a tribe. You don't build a tribe with automatically everybody on the hill joining you in what you're trying to do. You're going to be looked at as weird. You're going to be misunderstood. You're going to be ridiculed at first. But once you get number 2, and then he says, when you get to number 3, 4, 5, all of a sudden, by the end of it, right, everybody's on the hill like, well, I'm going to do it too, as he moved forward. And to me, that's what Jesus illustrated to us. He started with the 12, and that just expanded to the fact that Greeks were coming and all kinds of people were coming from many places because of Christ.
And there's so much that I want to unpack on this. So I've seen during this whole crisis that churches are obviously closed, and there's kind of been the initial response is just to run to our Zoom meetings and just make sure that our members are being catered for. Well,
Right.
what are your thoughts on just the current climate within church and our need for change? And obviously our methods have changed somewhat, but it seems as though our mission is actually oriented at ourselves and our congregations. What would you comment on that scenario, and how do you see this as an opportunity for change for the church?
I think the church, unfortunately, at the very heart of adaptability is innovation. And innovative thinking is always something that comes in response to something that everyone else is not adapting to, and you're going to adapt to. That's what makes it innovative. Kodak didn't want to get into digital pictures, so they went out of business. But they were the 4th wealthiest brand in the world after McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and Disney. So you're like, how did you, as a multi-billion-dollar company, go under? Because you were unwilling. And you thought, oh, we just make film. And I love Henry Ford's comment about people who were making horse and buggies when he invented the Model T car. Everyone complained that he put them out of business. And Henry Ford said, no, you just forgot what industry you were in. You thought you were in the horse and buggy business, but you're in the transportation business. And I think they should have been making steering wheels and windshield wipers and better seating and proper reclining, abilities to your car, instead of complaining that, oh, nobody wants to buy a whip and a horse and buggy anymore. You missed the point. You're in the transportation business. And I feel like in the church right now, what we're doing is we think that we're in the business of just pleasing our members. So then we create Zoom meetings and it's all for our members. Oh yeah, we're just going to be internally focused, when the purpose of the church is to reach out to the world. And what we don't realize, that we have a very unique opportunity where there are people who might join a Zoom meeting that would never physically walk in your church. And if you say, we're going to do a Zoom meeting about this and invite people to that Zoom meeting, if we're going to create a digital space for engagement, come all ye atheists, get your questions answered. Be as honest, be as critical, be as skeptical as you want. And Christians will sit aside and they will listen to you. They won't insult you. They're not going to just, preach to you and try to say, hey, listen, all your arguments are whack and we're going to gang up on you and just share testimonies. No, let's actually come together and reason. We can create events like these. And this is what Zoom is an opportunity. Guess why? Because all of these people, atheists, other people we're trying to reach in our community, are at home. They're looking for digital content, which becomes the second opportunity in this crisis is, why are we not creating content? Why are we not putting out video content, audio content, writing content to engage these people while they have the time to actually read these things. And so to me, we have to get out of that mindset that we always say in sports, when a player is about to be up for a very big contract, and they say, should they give him the contract or her the contract, or should they not? And the question that is always raised is, who are they now? If they are a person that gives us problems now, if they're a person that doesn't like to cooperate with the team, if they're a person that is not very well behaved off the field, when you give them more money, they're just going to become worse and worse and more who they already are. People don't change because you paid them $90 million. And it's the same with the church. Now that we have Zoom, we haven't changed. We're still the same way. You're just giving us a digital way to do exactly what we were doing in the physical building, which is just minister to ourselves and be inward focused. And I think this is a very good opportunity to break that thinking and change and expand what we do.
What I'm seeing for myself, and I'm sure others can relate to this, is this is a huge opportunity for some self-reflection and just understanding, okay, who am I relating to? Who am I who am I in relationship with, and what am I trying to get, or what can I gain from these relationships? Is there a mission behind the people that I'm connecting with, or am I just doing that because that's who I am? And so, yeah, there's a real opportunity for some self-reflection and even crystallizing mission in our own minds. Okay, the methods that we used to use are no longer appropriate, but certainly we can now adapt through our methods to suit the mission that has not changed, regardless of all the change that we see around us. We've had a question come in, Sebastien, and that is, can you share from your own personal experience? And this is our last chance to ask question, guys. We've got about 5 minutes left. And so, quickly get your questions in. Sebastien, can you share an experience from your own life in becoming a Christian? How did you adapt, and what were some of the biggest areas in your life where you were forced to adapt?
Ooh, wow. I was out there, man. I mean, I was I was out there. I was doing the devil's business. I was working in his business. I think one of the biggest adaptations I had to go through in becoming a Christian was friendships, the way we relate in the church. When I was in the world, my friends and I were, your boys were your boys, right? Your girls were your girls. And we shared everything. We knew everything about each other. We were always honest. We were transparent. We could go through our struggles together. And coming into the church, I began to see how people had walls, and everybody wanted to look like they weren't a sinner, even though we preach every Sabbath that everybody's a sinner. But nobody wants to look that way. That was really hard for me because I came from a context on the streets, and growing up in a very rough neighborhood and all of that, we always talked about the idea of keeping it real. And so for me, coming into the church, that was very difficult to adapt to the fact that people were just not going to open up. They were not going to be transparent and honest. They were not going to come and say, hey, is anyone struggling, today? And people would come to me privately and say, I have all these issues. I'm like, why not go to the pastor? Why not talk to the elders? Like, bring this to prayer meeting. Like, we should really be praying for you. No. People are going to gossip. People are going to say things about me, right? They're going to look down upon me. They're not going to allow me to serve in the church because I have issues in my life. That was a big thing that I had to adapt to. I think another big thing that I also had to adapt to was how I also looked at relationships, romantic relationships. Coming from a worldly paradigm, sexuality and all those things is something that when you're in college, I was converted while I was a college student. There's really no rules to the game. And when I came into the church, I didn't know how to do it as a Christian. And there's a lot of information that's just not passed down. So you get a lot of people doing shady things in relationships, like they act like they're interested, but then they never really confirm. They do things that make it seem like, this is where this is or it isn't, but that's actually not true. I think that it's that was a big adaptation for me. And I had to go through my own biblical study on what is God's ideal for relationships? What is God's perspective on sexuality? He created sex. He created this type of intimacy. What was his ideal? And that study really helped to kind of recalibrate my mind and help me to adapt to a Christian context of relationships. Because in the world, there's no line. You know, there's nothing that's not open, right? People have open relationships, open marriages. People are, you know, hey, your spouse could be bisexual, like that's okay. Like that's what he needs to do. That's what she needs to do. Then so be it. Long as they come home to me, like this is their perspective. And I feel like coming into the church is a very huge culture shock on that level.
No, hey, that's so insightful for us, Sebastien. Just one last question before we close. What resources do you have on this topic, and how can we dig deeper for those of us that see a need to remain more adaptable and more open to change in our Christian experience or even in our work culture as well? Do you have any resources that could be handy for us, or any points of scripture that we can focus on?
I think there are two individuals' lives that I would really consider to be strong examples of adaptation. One is the life of Joseph. Joseph had to go through a lot of adaptations. He had to react to a lot of different changes around him. And he successfully navigated that. And so to me, the life of Joseph is a very, very good example. Another one I would also consider, which may be a little bit strange and different, is either the book of Ruth or the book of Esther. Those are also situations that were thrust upon people, right? Esther didn't have a choice. She didn't have like, oh, this was my aim. She's like in a situation, and it's like, hey, by the way, you're the queen now of Persia. Oh, and by the way, you need to help us deliver, you know, your people. And there's a lot of things when you look in the book of Esther, you're kind of like, this is a little strange. Like this young woman is dealing with a lot of pressure in how she's handling this. And so I think that's a very clear. In the New Testament, I would look at Paul and Silas and Barnabas and all of their exploits and missions. And you would see throughout the book of Acts how they have to constantly adapt to who they're witnessing to. Practical resources for career. There's a lot of articles in Inc.com and Entrepreneur that talk about the flex generation, that talk about being adaptable as an individual in your skill set, considering, you know, being a polymath and the value of that to your ability to be innovative and to really impact the world around you. So I think those are a lot of resources there. And then the last thing I would say is pick up biographies of very influential people. You'll be surprised how they got to where they got. When you think about Steve Jobs, he took a calligraphy class when he dropped out, just one calligraphy class, and how this made him obsessed with design and fonts and the way that the MacBook was designed, the way the iPhone, all these different things that he worked on. He got a lot of these ideas from that calligraphy class. When you look at Elon Musk and what he's done with Tesla and sustainable cars, you see the fact he worked in PayPal. Like it has nothing to do with cars and all these different things. But because he had a compelling goal of making energy efficient cars accessible to the common person, it compelled him to learn manufacturing, engineering, electrical knowledge about how these things could work. And reading about the lives of these type of people is very instructive to us because it's story-based, and we typically draw from that. There is a book called Adapt or Die that's out there that talks a little bit about it. And also I would read Pixar Studios book, Creativity, Inc. They also, that story of what they do and how they do it has a lot of insight about how to be adaptable and the things that they went through to start that company and how they built and became what they became. So those are some very general resources that I could probably put out there about dealing with this question.
Sebastien, can I just jump in now? It's Joel, sorry to cut in. I'm just trying to bring some of these things together. There's been a couple more questions while you were talking there. And I was just keen to know a lot of us grew up in a church environment. So, you know, we're talking about change in church and change in the church approach and vision in this time, at this time of Earth's history. Is there, we've seen the examples that you've brought out. We've also seen examples where God seems to change, when he deals with Moses and when he deals with Hezekiah, he gives him extra years in his life. And in Hebrews chapter 13, we see that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so you're trying to put all these things together. You don't want to change for change's sake, yet at the same time, God is everlasting and the same throughout history when we talk about his love and his character. How do we balance that? And I think that's where I'm trying to bring your thoughts and the discussion and Joel's fantastic hosting together, is that if we were to have a takeaway from today, what is that balance? When do we pull the trigger and change? And when do we say, no, this is what God has set aside and this is the way we should do it? And how do we manage to find that balance?
I think when you look at those scenarios, for example, if we use God as an example, when you see God responding to Hezekiah as an example and extending his life, we see that this is God's typical character reacting to exactly the stipulations and the conditions of his promises and what he's willing to do. And so when Hezekiah prays and turns to God, we in the human experience may view it as, oh, God changed his mind, right? And so Hezekiah prayed and he was able to change the mind of God. But the truth is, God foresaw this situation, right? God wasn't caught off guard. And God's mind is just like the Ninevites, right? He was going to destroy Nineveh. They repented. God didn't destroy the city. So we see that God has a decision in mind. And he says, okay, when it comes to my judgments, I'm willing to change if these things change. Manasseh, when he went to prison, he got him arrested. He got him taken down as a king. But when he prayed in that prison and sincerely repented, God restored him. Nebuchadnezzar became crazy for 7 years. This is the same experience. As soon as he knew that the Most High ruled in the kingdoms of men, his reason was returned to him. His kingdom was returned to him. And so I think in terms of God and when to pull that trigger on change, we see that God always errs on the side of mercy, right? When those conditions are met. When we translate that principle in our life, in terms of when do we pull the trigger on change and when do we not, I go back to my original comments, which when God says he's the same, he's talking about his character. He's talking about the values by which he operates. When we're dealing with change in our lives, it is our character, our values, the principle that constrain us that can never change. The trigger is never to be pulled there. But where the trigger should be pulled, we see this in the life of the Apostle Paul, eating with the Gentiles, going into their homes, bringing them with him. Timothy, having to get circumcised. Paul is always trying to adapt in ways that were uncomfortable to everybody else because he said, listen, the point is to spread the gospel. It's not to keep these traditions and these ritualistic behaviors forever and ever and ever. That's not the mission that Jesus sent us out to do. And so it took the Acts 15 council to get them to accept it, but they saw wisdom in it. They couldn't deny the Gentiles were receiving the Holy Spirit. They couldn't deny Peter's experience with Cornelius. And so I think we should always pull the trigger in any area of life where this is not a non-negotiable principle in our lives. When you translate that professionally, we have to decide in our minds that, listen, God never said, Sebastien, you're going to be an entrepreneur for the rest of your life. God never said that when I worked in the conference and I trained missionaries for 11 years, you're going to be training missionaries for the rest of your life. That was never his promise. Has God called me to train people? Has God called me to preach? 100%. But that has looked very different over the years. In the 18 years that I've been a Christian, it's come in different forms and ways. And I've always been willing to allow God to lead in his providence. And as long as I'm not compromising my values to do it, then I'm happy to pull the trigger on change.
Thank you so much for your discussion, for your thoughts, and thank you, Joel, as well, for facilitating this. I think it's been really great, and there's been more questions come through. As soon as we said time's up, everyone flooded their questions through. So we wish we could keep going, but we'd be happy to continue the discussion online on Facebook. And I'm sure it's something that, you might want to take up with your friends as well and continue to delve into this topic. I wonder if you could, Joel, say a word of prayer to close for us, and then we have a few details about next week's broadcast and where to from here.
Yeah, awesome. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you so much for the information that we've received this morning and for the conversation that we've been a part of. Father, we want to pray that this wouldn't merely just be information that we have heard, but this would be an opportunity for us to take a look in the mirror and see where you are calling us, and to question our current methods and our current methodologies, and that you would lead us to be more engaged in the mission that you have called us to as Christians here on this earth. Father, we thank you so much for the wisdom that you have imparted to us this morning, and we pray that we would simply act on what we have heard, and that as we have been challenged, Father, that you would lead us further and deeper into relationship with you, and that everyone that we come in contact with would be impacted by this. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties at the start. Thank you to all of you who have tuned in via Zoom or Facebook, and eventually we got there. We'll put the recording up. But I think the discussion today really segues nicely into next week's presentation. I think Sebastien set it up really well. We are privileged to have Elder G.T. Ng, the Executive Secretary of the World Church, join us next week. And he's going to be talking about the World Church and how the church approaches this time in Earth's history, and what as young professionals and young adults we should be doing as part of that, or we could be doing as part of that process as well. So it'll be a really exciting and interactive time again to ask and go back and forth to have some thoughts on that. And we're going to do things a little bit differently for next week as well. If you have questions that you have pre-prepared, or you have questions that you really want to ask, send them in before the actual broadcast time. And if you go onto our Facebook page, the Mission Collective SDA, you'll be able to get details about how to submit those questions, and then we can start the ball rolling really quickly early on and get the questions coming in. So next week at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Time, here in the eastern part of Australia, and join us for another broadcast of A New Thing with Pastor GT next week. Berenice, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I just wanted, some people are asking Sebastien about how they can find out more about your businesses, and particularly you mentioned one about Christian mentorship. And so if people want to find out more information or to get involved and support what you're doing, or to learn from you, how can they do so?
Sure. I will type my email here in the chat box. And I see that I got thrown off here for a second. But yeah, so if they essentially go, I'll type my email here. They can also contact me over social media. My Instagram, I think, is another way to do it. And basically can reach out to me. There is an application process if people are interested in the mentorship stuff. And then I can also send them some more general info. But because it's still very early startup, I don't even have a website. I don't really have a lot of those things in play, a logo, because I'm really focused on making sure I'm creating value, and that this is something that people are interested in really refining the experience before we do that. But yeah, if people are interested in being an early adopter and joining me in that, I would love to have them in there. But yeah, they can contact me those ways, and I can give them more information moving forward.
Okay. And I know that on your social media, on your Instagram, you're also creating like really short devotionals that people can tune into and get a taste of the type of things that you'll be discussing. Is that correct?
Yes. So anytime I do a spiritual series, it's available to everyone online. Inside the mentorship platform, I do courses on, I have an 11-part series on innovation, entrepreneurial mindset thinking, mentorship, storytelling, stuff like that. And then they get ebooks that I write with them. So yeah, that content is restricted to the inside mentees, but outside, that gives you a sense of exactly the type of style and what we do inside, some of the content that they get access to.
All right. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. And we hope that you have a blessed Sabbath for all of us here in Australia. And thank you, Sebastien, again for joining us. Thank you, Joel, for hosting. And we'll see you again next week.
Awesome. Good to see you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.